Stephen Cologne, and I work for Innovative Inc. and we're working on our first mobile game, Cupcakes and Critters.
Cool. I'm Ryan Lassard, and I run business development for a company called Pollen.
Any advice for him?
Well, we were just talking about relationships with platforms and strategy around launching your game, and I think one of the most important things to remember is that if you're wanting to build a relationship with those platforms, keeping them in the loop and pitching the game early on, and then showing them progress over time is super important, because they want to see the potential and they want to see updates and they want to know about them, the game itself, and ultimately I think they have to pitch it internally at the platforms to increase your likelihood of getting featured. And so what it comes down to is, do they feel comfortable sharing their game with the rest of the team at Apple or Google or whatever platform? So it's something to keep in mind.
Okay. And how far along are you with your game?
Not as far as I wanted to be. I guess I fell for the indie trap of underestimating time it makes to make the game, but we were far enough. The thing is, we built the game up with just making sure we get it out there as soon as possible. So we even had like a simple vertical slice. So we did a Penny Arcade Expo in Boston. We actually did 2 of them. And then we started building the fan base, and we make sure we get the branding right. The way the characters are, looks, and everything. Get lots of feedbacks from our potential customers, the players themselves. And in doing that, we help build that awareness, that grassroots awareness, and build that fan base and build that virality to it along with building the game. Doing that along the way, we came with the For Tours event that Apple came to us, and we started building a conversation about that, because we saw the efforts we were going to the community and things like that, hopefully. So that's where we're at right now. So we're still going to soft launch later on in the next few months. But it's been a slow progress, but hopefully it'll pay off, because we're a small indie. We're bootstrapped. We're not a big investor. So this is the strategy we came up with, doing a lot of fan building from scratch, grassroots type of thing, to help us get our presence out.
So, from a startup or game point of view, what do people underestimate becomes the biggest challenge? You mentioned time. Is it time?
It's definitely time. Yeah. I think development time is always longer than you anticipate.
True.
I think testing times always takes longer than you typically budget for. I think that the other thing is probably capital required to do some certain initiatives, but I think that's one constraint that's probably beneficial in a lot of cases, because I see a lot of startups or people building apps in the mobile space that are just more resourceful as a result of that constraint. So I think probably the biggest challenge is time, and then ultimately probably the second one is capital.
How about finding talent? Is it easy or hard to gauge, or?
No, it's hard. I mean, identifying talent is a really hard problem for humans, like in general. And I think that you have these big companies that have tested processes in place, and that helps them. But as a small company, you don't really have statistically significant samples to test out your process for interviewing or otherwise. And so I think identifying talent is hard. And then of course, a lot of talent, especially if you're trying to recruit in Silicon Valley, unemployment rate's basically 0. So you have to actually recruit someone from whatever they're doing and convince you to work on their thing. So I think people are more accepting of making a job change than they were a decade ago, but at the same time, it's certainly challenging to identify talent and bring someone on board that you trust. I can speak a little bit
to that too, because when we started, I was a one-man shop. I just had an idea for a game, learn Unity, learn how to program. I was coming back from a little bit of the art side. And once I did the first pack with my brother and my friend, we saw that this is a potential success. We need to build a team. We need to build people. We need to get more artists, more programmers. How do we find people without a budget? So after Boston, we came back to New York, where we're based out of. I looked up online for any local indie development events, and that's how I found Playcrafting and things like that.
Cool.
And then I went to game meetups. I went to game arcade tournaments and things like that, and I just asked people around looking for other programmers, other developers. So coming to events like this is a great place to meet like-minded people. And I showed them a demo of the game, and then asked them like, what do you think about this, and things like that. And then you can really easily connect with people. You see, this is the person I like to work with, and then what kind of skill set they have, knowledge, and it's basically a very informal interview. And it's more of like building a friendship there, because you can't get them up with we have no salary to them, so you have to help build that passion up. So then they become passionate with the project, and then decide to join a team. And from there, this is how I built my small little team. So I hope that helps.
It does. One last one.
Sure.
You work with a heck of a lot of startups and newbies. Is there a common thread of the least successful ones versus the more successful ones? Or is it just potluck? You never know.
Well, I think there's really no substitute for experience, and so we'll work with new companies that have had experience doing certain things before, been successful in certain areas, and they're then bringing it to a new industry. So I think that there's really, ultimately a lot of the success comes from experience, which means you have to have some failures, and you have to expect that's going to happen. I think too, it's the expectation should always be that you individually should think that everything's going to succeed, but on the flip side, the likelihood of success in the startup space is very, very small. And I think the one thing about the industry that we don't talk about enough is that there are a lot of skeletons along the way to seeing successes like Uber and Airbnb, and those guys get the press, but you don't hear about all the smart people that have started companies that haven't been successful or been ahead of their time, and for various reasons, they didn't work out. So I think timing plays this remarkably important role that we tend to undervalue, and we also tend to think that us as human beings have the full control over what's happening with regards to a company. But I do think it's important to remember that there are most companies aren't successful in starting, and at the same time, there are a lot of factors outside of our own commitment or effort or resources that impact your success.
Any difference between the West Coast and East Coast?
Yeah, money. There's that comes up time and time again. I'm Canadian, and so I talk a lot about the tech scene in Canada, and ultimately they're just, the capital just isn't there. There's money here, but I think one of the interesting things about capital is that in Silicon Valley you have capital from companies that have been successful in technology, whereas in other parts of the United States and around the world you have capital that comes from other industries. And so I think for investors to be comfortable deploying that capital, they typically are from the same industry. So with technology in Silicon Valley, you have access to money from people that have made money off of tech companies, and so that's what makes, I think, pitching a little bit easier in securing capital. The other thing I think that I've noticed a lot with West Coast versus the East Coast is I think West Coast individuals and professionals are a lot more open to sharing their network and doing introductions to people without worrying about the repercussions than on the East Coast. I find a lot of people on the East Coast and I'm from the East Coast, have a tendency to withhold their contacts as currency of sorts. Whereas I think people in the West have a tendency to like to share and connect people even if they don't know whether the mutual relationship will be beneficial. They're far more open to doing introductions to people. So I think that helps. I think that helps the business.
Recently, I gave a talk at GDC, and that was actually my first time being in San Fran, and I met. It was just a totally different vibe. Being a New Yorker, we're used to the hustle bustle, the doggy dog kind of thing. Over there, I see a lot of other developers. They're so laid back and so nice, and very open to relax and talk. And also another thing I said, researching as entrepreneurs in general. A lot of the question, what is the difference between Silicon Valley and everyone else? And one thing I see, like a lot of cities around the world, we want to be the next Silicon Valley. We want to make our own Silicon Valley. The thing is, one major thing they're missing is that a lot of people from Silicon Valley actually came to there. They actually had the gumption to get up and leave everything they know and go there, and then become very entrepreneurial that way. And there's also another saying in a big difference with Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world is when you fail in a business or something, you're often considered a failure. No one wants to invest in you, no one wants to talk to you or anything like that. You're done. In Silicon Valley, people who failed, they're called experienced. And that's a big different mindset with people in the Valley and in California in general versus the rest of the world, which I think the rest of the world should learn from.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point in that people that work in the Bay Area aren't necessarily from the Bay Area. They've uprooted themselves and moved there because of their passion, and that's probably just a demonstration of one important skill that entrepreneurs have. And so you end up getting this ecosystem of people that are willing to do that. So it's a good point in terms of replicating in other cities. Yeah, good point.